They took his child. Now he's taking everything back. When Quang returned after months of disappearance, he found nothing as he left it. His lover, Linda, was shattered. Their unborn child gone, stolen by a monster from her past. But grief quickly turned to fury as Quang uncovered a dark web of abuse, kidnapping, and human trafficking buried deep in the mountains. What started as a search for justice became a war for redemption. If you love gripping emotional storytelling with high stakes and raw humanity, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow this journey to the end. Now, let's begin. The rain hadn't stopped since the night Quang returned. It was as if the sky itself mourned the months he had been missing, months filled with silence, speculation, and scandal. Some said he had fled the country after his empire collapsed. Others whispered he had died in some remote land, a casualty of power games gone wrong. But now, he was back, alive, hollow-eyed, and dragging behind him the invisible weight of something no one yet understood. Linda had been sitting in the kitchen, cradling a lukewarm cup of tea between trembling hands when he walked through the door. Their eyes met, and the world froze. She didn't cry. Neither did he. Quang stood in the threshold like a man returning from war. His beard had grown wild, his skin darkened by sun and hardship. But his eyes, those once confident, steel-like eyes, now flickered with something darker, a storm barely restrained. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "For what?" Linda asked, her voice brittle like old glass. "For not being there," he said, stepping forward. "For leaving you to face hell alone." It wasn't until hours later, when the storm outside turned to thunder, that the truth finally surfaced. Linda, voice barely above a whisper, told him everything. How one night, weeks after he vanished, Quang, her ex-husband, had found her. How he had cornered her as she walked home from the clinic 6 months pregnant. How he had shoved her into the back of a van, gagged her, and driven for hours into the mountains. No one heard her screams. No one came. "He locked me in a cabin," she said, her eyes empty. "Deep in the forest. No phone, no light, no food for 2 days. I thought I would die there. I wanted to die. But all I could think of was the baby." Quang couldn't breathe. His chest rose and fell in heavy, uneven gulps. His hands trembled as he reached for hers. "When they found me, I was unconscious. The doctor said it was too late." The silence that followed was unbearable. Quang stood and walked to the window. Outside, lightning split the sky like a jagged scar. He pressed his forehead against the cold glass, his breath fogging up the pain. Then, without warning, a sob escaped his throat, a raw, broken sound that tore through the quiet like shattered glass. Linda had never seen him cry. He dropped to his knees. "I should have been there," he choked. "God, I should have—" "You didn't know," she said, but her own voice wavered. "But I left. I vanished when you needed me the most. I ran from everything, and in doing so, I left you to him." The shame was suffocating. He thought he had hit rock bottom when his company fell, when partners turned into enemies and the media tore him apart. But none of that compared to the agony of knowing he had lost a child, their child, while running from his own ruins. That night, Quang didn't sleep. He sat by Linda's side, listening to her breathe, watching her chest rise and fall like fragile waves. Something inside him had shifted. The man who had walked into that house hours ago was not the same one who now sat in silence. He had fled once, but he would not run again. In the depths of his grief, a fire ignited, cold, focused, and relentless. Quang had taken something that could never be returned, and Quang would not rest until he paid. Quang didn't speak much after that night. He barely ate, barely slept. Something inside him had broken, but in the fragments, something else began to take shape. A sense of purpose, not fueled by revenge alone, but by the unbearable need to restore what had been ripped from him, from Linda, from the life they were supposed to have. He began with what little Linda remembered: the van, the winding mountain roads, the scent of pine and smoke, the creaking of wood beneath her feet. She hadn't seen his face clearly. It had been dark, his voice disguised, but she had known it was Quang. She could feel it in her bones, in the way he cursed her, spat her name like poison. And that voice. She could never forget the way he said, "You think you can be happy without me?" Quang took those fragments and started digging. His connections in the business world were fractured but not entirely gone. With enough calls and a few old favors pulled from dusty drawers, he found a lead, a vehicle registration linked to Quang, last traced near a remote village nestled in the northern mountains, near the border, a place where law was a rumor and secrets were buried with the snow. He didn't tell Linda when he left. He kissed her forehead while she slept and left a note that simply said, "I'll come back with justice." Armed with a backpack, a burner phone, and a file of evidence, Quang headed north. It didn't take long for the pieces to align. In a grimy cafe near the border, he met Trung, a retired police officer who had investigated a string of disappearances years ago, cases that were quietly closed due to lack of evidence. Women, young, mostly poor. Most of them had vanished without a trace. Trung hadn't forgotten. "I've seen monsters in my time," Trung said, lighting a cigarette with shaky hands. "But the ones that wear the faces of men you think you know, they're the worst." Quang showed him Linda's medical report, photos of her injuries, the van's plate, and something shifted in Trung's eyes. This wasn't just about her. He's still doing it, and he's not working alone. Together, they traced Huan's steps into the jungle-covered hills, where only a few dirt paths and whispers from terrified villagers remained. They heard rumors of a man with scars on his face and a pistol on his hip, of strange lights in the woods, of girls never coming back. On the third day, they found it. Hidden deep in the forest, beneath a canopy so thick sunlight barely touched the ground, stood a cabin, more like a compound. Wood, metal, barbed wire. Quang recognized it from Linda's nightmares. The air was thick with a stench of sweat and gasoline, cameras mounted on trees, guards with radios. But worse than the structure was the sound that came from within, muffled crying. They waited until nightfall. Quang wanted to go in, fists swinging, but Trung stopped him. "We're not here to die. We're here to expose this. We gather proof, we alert the authorities, we burn this place with the truth." So they watched. They filmed. They captured faces, routes, license plates. And then they saw him, Quang, alive, smiling, laughing with the guards, the devil in the flesh. Quang's hands clenched so tightly, his nails dug into his palms. The rage was boiling, but he held it down. "This ends," he whispered, "tonight." By the time they reached the cabin, night had folded completely over the forest, sealing them in a world of shadows and breathless silence. Quang crouched behind a tree, his pulse heavy in his throat, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. This was it, the place where Linda had been held, where their child's heartbeat had ended. The air was thick with moss and old rain. Beside him, Lieutenant Din gave a terse nod, signaling the team to spread out. The tactical unit moved in silent synchrony, their dark uniforms blending into the undergrowth. But Quang didn't see them. His eyes were locked on the crooked silhouette of the cabin ahead, half buried under vines, almost forgotten by time. Almost. Inside, a single window glowed dimly, casting a flicker of orange onto the wet ground. Through the warped glass, Quang caught a glimpse of him, Quang, still alive, still walking the earth, still breathing the air his child never would. Quang's fingers curled into fists. He could feel the blood pounding through his veins, faster, harder, louder. He'd imagined this moment too many times, how it would feel to face the man who had destroyed everything. But now that it was real, it was no longer a fantasy of revenge. It was personal. Then, action. The flash grenade went off with a crack of thunder. The door cabin flew open. Screams erupted as the officers stormed in, voices barking commands. Quang rushed in after them, shouldering past the guard, barely aware of the chaos behind him. And there he was. Quang stood frozen in the center of the room, momentarily stunned by the blast. He turned just in time to see Quang charge, eyes wide. "You," was all he managed to say before Quang's fist collided with his jaw. The impact sent Quang crashing into a table. "You locked her in here," Quang hissed, grabbing him by the collar. "You left her to die." Quang sneered, blood on his teeth. "She deserved it. You both did." Rage exploded through Quang like wildfire. He struck him again and again as images of Linda's hollow eyes and trembling voice raced through his mind. Every blow was a scream he hadn't let out. Every hit was a piece of the grief he had buried. The officers had to pull him off. Quang slumped to the floor, coughing, bruised, but alive. "You think this is over?" he spat. "You're just like me." Quang stood above him, chest heaving. For a moment, he did consider it, reaching for the gun on his side, ending it all. But then Linda's voice echoed through his memory, not in anger, but in sorrow. Her strength hadn't come from vengeance, it had come from surviving, from choosing to live. "No," Quang said coldly, "I'm nothing like you." The operation uncovered horrors beyond imagination. Hidden rooms, chains, documents detailing names, movements, destinations. Dozens of women had passed through these walls, each with a story like Linda's, or worse. Rescue teams arrived, arrests were made, and by dawn, the place that had once been a prison was stripped bare, exposed under the full light of morning. When Quang returned to the city, it was Linda who met him at the gate. She didn't smile, she didn't pry. She simply walked up to him and placed her hand gently on his chest, as if to feel the heartbeat that had carried her through the storm. "I found him," he said, softly. "I know," she replied. They didn't speak of the past again that night. They sat together in silence, two scarred souls held together by something deeper than pain, resilience. Justice had been served, but healing, they knew, would take time. And for the first time in a long time, they had time.
Hello, xin chào tất cả các khán giả của kênh Lý Tử Ninja Review. Vậy là tập phim ngày hôm nay đã kết thúc tại đây. Nếu mọi người thấy tập phim ngày hôm nay hay, mọi người hãy cho mình xin một nút like, một nút chia sẻ và để lại bình luận ở dưới video nhé. Và đặc biệt là mong các bạn hãy ấn vào nút đăng ký kênh để nhận được thông báo mới nhất về các tập phim sẽ được phát sóng hàng ngày vào lúc 8 giờ sáng giờ Việt Nam trên kênh Lý Tử Ninja Review. Vậy là trong tập ngày hôm nay, Quang đã chính thức là báo công an về vấn đề là chồng cũ của Linda đã bắt cóc cô và khiến cô sảy thai. Liệu rằng công lý có được thực thi hay không? Sẽ được có được thực thi hay không? Chồng cũ của Linda có phải trả giá hay không? Tất cả sẽ được hé lộ vào các tập tiếp theo. Xin chào và hẹn gặp lại các bạn vào tập sau. Bye bye.